Welcome back to my dev blog. It has been about maybe 4.5 weeks since I released the previous one. We are going to follow the same formatting as the previous one. I'm going to talk about bug fixes that were recent within the last 4 weeks, features that I have written in the last couple of weeks, and more Magiclysm stuff specifically. There might even be some spoilers at the end of the video if you stick around. I'm just gonna touch on the list of bugs that I had fixed. I'm not gonna say a whole bunch about them. So, advanced inventory was broken for a time. If you hit comma to move all from one pane to your inventory, it crashed the game. I actually fixed that at one point. I've been hearing rumblings that still exists, so it either got reverted or something else is going on. Containers spawned 2 of a liquid, like 2 bleach, or that was the main one, bleach and ammonia. I'd actually changed the paradigm of what the fill with function does, and what I changed it to is, it just fills it up all the way, And that doesn't really work with item groups. The item group wants to tell you, okay, you have this much milk or ammo or flammable liquid, and it just kind of fills between the minimum and the maximum charges. It didn't really work out. I thought I was doing something good, because the other thing that it did is it filled up containers with solids. So like beef jerky. If you give a plastic bag of beef jerky, and that plastic bag can hold 6 liters, it'll fill up the whole bag with beef jerky. Now, this is obviously caused a lot of other things, so that had to get rearranged. Flashlights with no batteries crashed the game. Turns out that was a couple of different things. I'd fixed that a couple of weeks ago. I don't really remember the details. Cans opened themselves on saving the game. Now, this is separate from the issue that is currently still open, where cans spawn opened, which I will take a look at hopefully soon. I've been kind of low on motivation, so some of the harder bugs take a lot more energy than some of the easier ones. The other one is sewing kits. Now, this was a really big one that I'd even talked about in the previous video about how it was still in progress, but it finally landed. It's roughly 3 weeks ago now, and it was really large. It was actually about 1,000 lines of code, and it was basically me passing the torch over to Yutna for multi-mag. A lot of it involved changing what a magazine was, like the idea of what a pocket magazine is. So pockets have different types. There's a container pocket, there's a magazine pocket, which means it holds ammo, and there's a magazine well pocket, which means it holds an item that holds ammo. And then there's a bunch of other pockets that are a little more code related, like there's a software pocket where you store like software, and there's a corpse pocket where stuff's supposed to it isn't working yet, but the idea of it is corpses will stuff things into that pocket when they die, so that when they respawn, they pick up the items again. A work in progress. I haven't really touched it because it's not a high priority. It's actually a feature rather than a bug fix. Speaking of features, pretty minor feature in my opinion in terms of how easy it was to make, but it was pretty major in terms of user experience. The nested containers mode. When you press the semicolon in the inventory, it changes it into one column. Now, before, it was kind of in a random order, you couldn't really tell what was in other things. But what I did was I made it so that it was ordered by parent. So, you have a bottle, right? And then underneath the bottle is your liquid. And so you have this bottle in a backpack, and then another bottle, They're all in the backpack, and it shows underneath the backpack. So when you see your inventory screen, press semicolon, and you'll see that it lines it all out by container. This is not the same mode as the normal category mode, but it has the same functionalities. So you can use either of them to your heart's content. People have asked me for a more permanent toggle, so that you can maybe when it toggles, it remembers which option you were on. I haven't really come to terms with the thought on how that's going to affect the user experience yet, but I'm more focused on some other bugs. Wield cost. There is a wield cost when you pick up an item out of your inventory. Now, this used to be basically like 300 moves modified by some stuff like dexterity and how many arms you have that are broken. I actually made that so that it actually checks how many containers it's inside of and adds those all up. So then if you have, 35 plastic bags nested into each other and a handgun inside, it's going to take you like 30 minutes to pull it all out. This actually paved the way for one of the other features that I'll be talking about, which is Packmule. Now, Packmule is one of the traits that is very beloved by many, many players because it is very strong. It gave you a 40% storage bonus forever. So I would even say that in terms of how this game works, it wasn't balanced in any shape or form. There's no way you could gain that. There's no way you could lose that trait. You just always had more inventory. But what does this mean in nested containers? Say you have a belt with a pocket, right? And it fits exactly one magazine. If you have Packmule, what would it do? Would it make the belt larger so that it could fit a magazine and a half? How does that work? If it's exactly a magazine, things don't change their shape, right? Now, a lot of people have argued that there maybe is a special way to pack things into a backpack, which is a reasonable counterpoint. But there is another issue. I talked to Kevin about what it would take for nested containers Packmule to work. And what it would take is the item class would have to be exposed to the character class. Basically, they would both have to be exposed to each other, which is a big no-no for object-oriented programming. It basically super invasive for one feature. Now, I wouldn't say it's a small feature, but it's one feature that, with nested containers, there might be ways to work around it eventually. So what I had to do is I had to decide, okay, well, I could either remove it totally from the game forever, or I can make it do something else. Now, there are reasons to pick one or the other. Removing it, maybe people will get mad that I removed it and didn't have any chance to do the other way that I talked about, the invasiveness, and the other way, which is changing it. Now, if you look at the pull request, for the Packmule thing, people have already said, well, why didn't you choose the other thing? Well, there are hardware issues that I already talked to Kevin about it. I know what it would require, and it's way too much. So I chose to make it change the wield cost of items from a backpack. This is I added another thing to mutations so that mutations can modify how quickly you can get things in and out of a backpack. So, I just put on some nominal numbers in a mutation and be like, okay, people who are more balance-oriented can fix it because it's all JSON now. So, now the new one, Pocket Favorites. This is one of those major user experience things that I would say are required for 0.f stable for nested containers. Pocket Favorites is an allowance for the player to make special rules for each pocket for items to go in them or not go in them. This allows the player to micromanage a lot less, in the day-to-day. When you're picking up an item, you have to choose where it goes. Well, the algorithm should pick that, and you should be happy with that choice. If you're not happy with that choice, why aren't you happy with the choice? And what can we do from a user experience point of view to fix that so that the player can make their own choices maybe elsewhere, right? So what I did is I made it so that you have a menu that you adjust the pocket properties. So you open up a pocket, you open up an item, and it has a list of pockets, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're looking at jeans, for example, it'll show your contents in it, right? And then you will see a list of stuff that's in it, and then you have a couple of options. You can change the priority level of it, meaning if it has a higher priority, it will pick that before all other normal priority items, or a blacklist or whitelist. If it has a whitelist, it will be above all priority items that have no whitelist, for instance. Okay, So this is a big step forward in how to make the inventory system, the nested container system, user-friendly, right? A lot of people have worried over the 5 months since I posted the first post on Pockets that, well, what if this is going to be terrible user experience, UI, right? Because the only Pocket system I know of that is anyway similar to how our game works and how we could possibly have the game work Fortress. And we all know of the user interface nightmare that is Dwarf Fortress. I'm not going to lie, I love Dwarf Fortress to death. I played it many, many hours. But you have to download external tools in order to get Dwarf Fortress, the Fort mode specifically, to work properly in any kind of scale. Now, as you know, I do all of this for free. I do this all as a labor of love, but I do have donation options. In my description, I will have a link to GitHub sponsors, and in there you can find my PayPal if you choose not to sponsor me. I am happy with any of the ways you choose to help me. You can either donate to me, you can give me words of encouragement, you can just play the game. It's what I'm here for, okay? I'm making the game better for everyone. Current bugs I know about and current bugs that I'm going to work on in a short-term perspective, okay? Containers spawn open. This is a bug that has been haranguing me for 3 weeks now? Maybe 4 weeks. It's really hard to track down because by the time the container is open, you can't upload a save file for it because it's already open. I can't figure out why it was open in the first place. Okay, I'm going to have to spend maybe 3 or 4 days just tracking this down and figuring out, okay, what's going on here? And honestly, I'm expecting that the fix will take me, 30 minutes. But finding the bug is going to take me days. And forgive me if that's not really high on my priority list because it is just an amount of work. The amount of work necessary to fix the bug is so much higher than the other bugs that exist right now. For instance, it was brought to my attention on Discord today that there's a forge bug issue where you can't craft things using a forge. Now, I can kind of guess what the issues are there. But that kind of brings me, well, how do I prioritize bugs? As a player, I'm sure you wonder that thing. I absolutely do play the game, but I don't play it the same way as a lot of other players. It's a sandbox game if ever I've played one. You could start out as a superhuman and just trash the entire zombie population just because you want to. Or, you can build a faction from the ground up. So there are many ways to play the game. Okay, how do you figure out, okay, what's an important bug, right? So, pretty main number one. If the bug crashes or freezes the game, it's higher priority by default, all right? Now, how accessible is it? How many play styles does it affect, right? How often does this bug happen? Right? How many players, basically? How many players are telling me, the game's really crashy, Okay, well, now I need to look into this. What's causing all that, right? The next one is, deleting items or deleting things. That's another pretty high priority thing that, you can just debug it in, but I don't need you to be doing that in the first place. The game should work in such a way that you don't have to worry about items just disappearing or any other things. Items just happen to be the nested container effector right now. But it could be effects, or it could be traits, or it could be any other number of things. I guess number 3 on the list is, how easy is it to fix? How much energy do I have to spend finding out what the bug is compared to my knowledge of the code base and how to fix it already, right? So we come back to the containers bug thing. I don't even know what's causing it. If I knew what was causing it, I could fix it real fast, okay? This is like the forge thing. That one, I already have an idea of what it is, so I know where to look in the code and I know what kind of breakpoints to set. It might just take me an afternoon. While the sewing kits bug, for example, that was a major issue because it was a huge infrastructural underlying problem. You know, it may seem kind of weird. You're like, what? Sewing kits cause that? But if you look at the actual pull requests and you have any kind of knowledge and you follow the conversation, I'm actually changing a whole lot about the underlying system rather than just outright just fixing the bug, right? And, you know, I left a lot of the JSON unfinished because, let's be honest, a lot of other people can do JSON. I can do certain things that people can't. So I'm going to try to focus on that so we can spread around the work. I'm happy to do some JSON occasionally, but that's an easy way for me to get burned out. Now we come to Magiclysm. All right, what have I been doing recently? Well, Manatouched is a recent addition to Magiclysm within the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 months maybe. And it's very focused on mana and new magic spells and glowing a lot. I've been twiddling around with it a lot. I think I've got it in a pretty happy place right now, except for the fact that there's some errors on Travis right now. So I still got to twiddle with it a little more. I'd like to maybe write some more traits for it to be a little bit fleshed out more, but I think it can be a very interesting mutation tree for you to play in Magiclysm. Achievements. I started working on some achievements just to kind of dip my toes in the water because it's something in the code base that's really new and I wanted to figure out how it worked. I only added some really basic ones like learn a number of spells and there was one other thing that I can't remember. Illiteracy. This is a really simple bug fix. I was just watching a stream and somebody asked, well, hey, can you still learn from spell books if you're illiterate? And like, oh yeah, you can. I'm like, oh, whoops. So I just, that was actually a real like a 2-line change. And it kind of surprised me that I never got around to it. It's simple things that kind of, you know, fall through the sieve. Bags of holding are relatively new. I didn't really add them to a lot of item groups because they're very strong. But basically a few weeks after nested containers, well, actually, I built in some of the features it uses in nested containers. So you might find a bag of holding if you look in some of the higher tier areas like the Demon Spider Lair or the Dragon Lair. Speaking of that, I added Goblin Encampments. This is a relatively, I guess I want to say medium-sized, like fortress, or fort, less than a fortress. It's got some mobs in there. I'm not going to spoil it too much, but it's kind of geared towards, you know, early mid-game players. If you're not careful, you might get overrun, but the creatures that are in there aren't super strong. Okay, so if you don't want spoilers, now's the time to say bye-bye. But I'm working on a new feature for Magiclysm. They are going to be called attunements, and they are a lot like the base spell classes that you have, like Biomancer, Technomancer, but they combine two, and they give you some extra spells and some extra abilities. I'm really pushing on Magiclysm's uniqueness here, where you have to pick one thing, and you can only be that one thing because you've chosen to be that one thing, even if it may not necessarily have been an informed decision. Of course, there's a lot of things to finish out with that. I've got a lot of lore and descriptions and mutations and stuff to write. It's a pretty long-term project, actually, and I'm going to be super excited when I start releasing more information. If you are part of my $8 tier in the sponsors, I've already sent out an email that has a link to a flowchart of all of the attunements that I am working on, and I update that personally. That is actually a workflow for myself to use, and I will probably release that to the public after the attunements system is set into place. Now, another thing to add is attunements are aimed toward being more mid-late game, late game levels of damage and ability, because, you know, as soon as you get a gun, most of the magic stuff kind of goes away. But there's some very interesting lore questions I have to answer there. Anyway, thank you for sticking with it and waiting the 4+ weeks since the first video. I'm probably going to keep a relatively similar schedule. There's only so much content I can push out, and it is possible that sometimes it will take a little bit longer due to things like needing to take a break. Because, you know, recently I've been feeling pretty terrible about current events, and that really has impacted my individual contributions, which you can even see on the GitHub. Anyway, have fun.